the Prime Minister's chief advisor. Ibrahim Kalın joins us on the phone right now. Mr. Kalın, thank you very much for joining me. Do you think the Prime Minister will have these talks that he has called for and has agreed to, and will there be any meaningful result from them?
Yes, the Prime Minister is planning to have this meeting tomorrow with representatives of the peaceful protesters. And in fact, it's an important step on the part of the government after, days of protest attacks, on public buildings, private property, police, etc. And the tomorrow meeting, in fact, is an indication and confirmation of the fact that the government has made a clear distinction between peaceful protesters and troublemakers from the very beginning.
Right. I know that you've been saying that, but let me ask you this. The government also said that no police would go into Gezi Park, and they did, and they fired tear gas. And how are the people meant to trust the words from the government?
Well, a little bit of clarification there. Actually, the police did not go in, as far as I know, did not go into the Gezi Park. In fact, I'm looking at the pictures that you're showing. That's mostly from the Gezi Park area. People are allowed and free to go around the Gezi Park. They cleaned up the Taksim Square. There are two places there. They're close to each other. The morning interception was meant to clear up the square, not the Gezi Park. That was announced, and that, as far as I know, that has been the case since this morning.
All right, can you be clear then? Are the protesters allowed to stay in Gezi Park? Because our reporter there, our Damon, basically was there when tear gas was being fired into the park.
No, the protesters are there. In fact, the governor and the mayor have also announced this. The protesters are in Gezi Park at the moment.
And they're allowed to stay?
Yeah, they're allowed to stay. The police, as I said, intervened in the morning to clean up the Taksim Square because, as you have seen, or maybe your viewers may not know these groups, these are mostly very marginal, some of which very illegal, groups that have tried to dominate the scene and occupy the Taksim Square. And if you had a chance to look at some of their placards and their banners, etc., you very clearly see the type of message they are giving. It's not the peaceful protesters anymore. It's this other second group which the government has distinguished from the first group.
I know we've heard many people like yourself, government officials and members of parliament and certainly members of the Prime Minister's party, make this distinction and calling certain protesters radicals and extremists and terrorists. There are many questions about why you're saying that and what do you exactly mean. Who are these people that you call terrorists? Why do you not accept that they're part of a broader and expanding protest movement?
Well, it's very clear. I mean, this is not any different from the methods that were used, say, in the UK to disperse the crowds. In fact, today in London, a group of protesters tried to storm the buildings of the G8 summit in London, and the London police had to intervene to distinguish those from peaceful protesters. In fact, the same thing happened in the Occupy Wall Street events. The same thing happened in Greece, in Spain, most recently in Sweden. The police obviously have the mandate to establish public order, and peaceful protesters have been allowed to have their own demonstrations in the Gezi Park, but others have, as we have seen this morning, attacked the police with Molotov cocktails, with sticks, with whatever they can get, and they're obviously not the peaceful protesters. So that's why we're making this distinction. That's why the Prime Minister has reached out to these people to have a dialogue about the Gezi Park project, about their concerns, about many other issues. You have to make this distinction to have a meaningful dialogue. Obviously, some of these marginal groups that have been attacking the police, public buildings, etc., they are, I mean, anywhere in the world, they will not be considered peaceful protesters.
So, Mr. Kalın, what is the government, what is the Prime Minister ready to give in his talks tomorrow, as you say, still plan to go ahead with these protesters? They've made several demands. What is the Prime Minister willing to give?
Well, of course, the message is very clear, that he's willing to have this dialogue. He's listening. He's going to listen to these people. And of course, I cannot predict the contents of the discussion tomorrow, but his message, as he's been saying over the last 2 days, that he's willing to have this dialogue with the peaceful protesters as long as their demands are democratic. Calling a government to resign is not sufficient by itself for a government to go, obviously. This is an elected government. People have been talking about the government having an authoritarian streak, the prime minister becoming almost a dictator. You know, that kind of accusation is completely false, baseless. The Turkey has internationally recognized elections. The most recent election was held in 2011. The prime minister was elected with 50% of the vote. But the picture people are trying to, and some of the media, I have to say, are trying to depict is as if you have a dictatorship in Turkey, as if all life has come to a halt. In fact, what you are showing even in your screen is only a very, very small part of Istanbul.
Well, we are getting as wide a view as possible, and that's why we're very grateful to be talking to you. Let me ask you, will the Prime Minister agree not to, raise Gezi Park? Will he agree not to do this mall? And also I need to ask you about the alcohol issue, because that does worry a lot of Turkey's young secular people who are used to being able to have a beer in Taksim Square. Yeah. Why has this measure been passed? People are worried about a creeping theocracy. I'm going to say it like that.
Well, Christiane, again, I mean, I think this is really an expression of a great confusion about some of the measures that government has taken in recent years about, say, alcohol regulation. The alcohol regulation that was passed and that was approved yesterday by the president, in fact, brings exactly the same international standards that you have anywhere in the world, whether you go to the UK or Germany or the United States. It's not any different. It's the same global standards that the World Health Organization has instituted for the purchase and use of alcohol. It's not any different. When you have the same regulation, say, in the UK, it's considered to be protecting the public from consumption of alcohol. When you have the same thing in Turkey, it is suddenly theocracy. It is suddenly authoritarianism. I'm having a hard time to understand this argument. In regards to some of these protesters, I have to mention this. Some of these people have been disrupting the public order, attacking. In fact, you can look at some of their flags, etc. Among them are the famous DHKPC, which is a leftist organization which carried out the attack on the American embassy back in February, which killed a couple of people there. So when you say these are all, peaceful protesters, we have to make this distinction. Otherwise, anybody who comes out on the streets to disrupt the public order will be treated as peaceful protesters. In regards
so the question, Mr. Kalın, because go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, in regards to this charge of authoritarianism, etc., again, I mean, this is really a very meaningless statement. People have been using this. I'm saying that, in fact, you have similar regulations. In the UK, for example, when Prime Minister Cameron says that there will be zero tolerance to all these disruptors, all these looters and plunderers, etc., this is considered to be a measure of protecting public order. When the police and other officials act in the same way in Istanbul, this is called authoritarianism. I'm trying to understand what's going on here. Is this a double standard or lack of understanding? Or maybe
well, Mr. Kalın,
I don't know.
Mr. Kalın, I'm not going to belabor this point, but you know that people are fed up with seeing journalists jailed, with seeing political space restricted. But I want to ask you one final question, and that is, how are you going to how is the Istanbul police going to clear Taksim Square while allowing the protesters to stay in Gezi Park? In other words, separate what you call troublemakers from legitimate protesters. How are you going to do it? Because the mayor says it's going to continue until it's cleaned.
Well, Christian, it's not going to be any different from what happened in the Occupy Wall Street event, say, in some of the parks in New York or in London and other places. That is, there are designated areas for peaceful protesters to have their protests. And those places have been designated. In Istanbul, it's the Gezi Park area. In Ankara, it's Güven Park, which is very close to the office of the Prime Minister. And for any other march, illegal demonstration, etc., obviously the police have to take a measure. I'll give you one example. You said, what is the concrete evidence? Last week, on the second day of the protests, on June 1st, Saturday, the Prime Minister ordered the police to leave the Taksim area and the Gezi Park. And the police left this whole area at 4 p.m. on Saturday And we thought that this will, calm things down. The same thing happened in Ankara. Güven Park area was designated for the protesters to have their peaceful protest. Everything was going fine until 8 o'clock in the evening. Suddenly, a group of people started to march on towards the Prime Minister's office in Beşiktaş, Dolmabahçe, where you had interviewed the Prime Minister, if you remember, a couple of months ago. And in Ankara, I was in the Prime Ministry building. The same group or similar groups began to march towards the building of the Prime Ministry. And of course, they had to stop. Can you imagine a situation where a group of people with sticks and Molotov cocktails, etc., marching towards the White House and allowing these people to attack public property?
On that note,
so the police
Mr. Kalın,
let me just finish. I finished. The police are trying,
Mr. Kalın, we've got to stop.
The
show's over. Sorry, Mr. Kalın. Thank you very much indeed.